Wrestling is often a family business, but that doesn't mean these families always have to get along. No, while some like the Von Erichs may have remained tight throughout their in-ring careers, most others at some point came to blows. Yes, as it turns out, there are few things more dramatic to present on a wrestling show than blood relatives who want nothing more than to tear each other apart. But what are the biggest examples of this? Well, that's exactly what we're going to be looking at today. And where better to start than with the iconic sibling rivalry between Bret and Owen Hart. Yes, Vince McMahon may not have initially been sold on the idea of having the Hart brothers start feuding in early 1994, as he didn't think it was realistic, but fans were certainly all behind it, and this soon changed the boss's mind. And thank God it did then, because what came out of this program was arguably the finest moments of each man's career, with Owen in particular being elevated to the level of main eventer as a result of the work he did here. How fitting then that, in kayfabe, the very reason he turned on his brother at all at the January 22nd, 1994 Royal Rumble was because he felt like he was being overshadowed by Bret, someone who was already firmly in the main event picture by then. Of course, he wouldn't just turn on him. No, after an injured Hitman refused to tag out during their tag team title match against the Quebecers, causing the referee to stop the bout and award the victory to the heels, Owen infamously kicked his brother's leg out of his leg and from there set about proving he was the real King of Hearts. And the way he would do this would be to not only shock the world when he pinned Bret clean in the opener of WrestleMania 10 a couple of months later, but also to win the King of the Ring in June, the very tournament the older Hart had won the year prior, en route to regaining the WWF title. So obviously, as a result of all this, Owen had earned himself a shot at that very belt. And this was what led to the pair's second 5-star classic of the year at August 29th SummerSlam, when they met inside of a steel cage with the top prize on the line. Unfortunately for the King of Hearts though, he wouldn't be able to come out of this one the victor. That said, he would ultimately get his revenge later in the year when he screwed Bret out of the title at Survivor Series. And with that, the legendary feud between the two pretty much came to an end, with them not really interacting on screen that much anymore until they finally reunited in 1997 and formed the all-new Hart Foundation stable. Yes, it was a relatively short beef, but one so great it's still being talked about today. It's just a shame the same can't be said for our next subjects then, because when Matt and Jeff Hardy split and started a feud not once, but twice, it spectacularly failed to get over each time. Why was this? Well, to put it simply, no one wanted to see the Hardy Boyz fight each other. No, what they really wanted was for the pair to keep teaming up in tag action. Hell, even if the plan was to have them branch off into the singles division, they could have still remained aligned with one another. But instead what we got in the summer of 2002 was Matt turning on Jeff after he'd apparently grown jealous of his developing success as a solo act. Needless to say then, given how limp the initial turn had been, the match which followed wouldn't be up to much either, as the pair seemed to sleepwalk their way through a bout neither appeared fully invested in. And perhaps this was why, afterwards, both were moved to separate brands, with that keeping them miles apart from one another, as Jeff approached main event stardom over on Raw, and Matt became a staple of the mid-card division on SmackDown with his version 1 character. But this wouldn't be the end of the Hardy Boyz story forever. No, after the pair reunited in 2006, they'd have another breakup in 2009, with that one going even worse than the previous effort, as it led to them stinking up WrestleMania with an absolutely awful match no one wanted to see. That said, why would they when the story getting us there involved such ridiculous things as Matt killing Jeff's dog by setting fire to his house with the pooch still inside it? Honestly, it's best if this one just goes forgotten altogether. And it's not the only family feud from WWE which needs to go forgotten either, because in an even worse example of siblings fighting when no one wanted to see it happen, in 2014, Nikki and Brie Bella brought new meaning to the term awful with their program. What was so bad about it? Well, for one, there was the infamous promo where Nikki told her sister she'd wish she'd died in the womb. And as if that wasn't bad enough, there was also the fact that with neither exactly being Bryan Danielson in the ring, something which is ironic when you consider Brie is married to the American Dragon, it meant any matches they were involved in throughout this period were routinely awful. But that wasn't the piece de resistance. No, this came about when, after Nikki beat her sister in a singles bout at October 26th Hell in a Cell pay-per-view that year, the latter was forced to become the winner's personal assistant for 30 days. And despite being humiliated and made to look like a fool throughout this month-long period, once it was over, Brie simply turned heel and aligned herself with Nikki once more, with there being no explanation given as to why she would do such a thing. Still, even if it had no explanation, most were happy to let this one slide, as at least it meant the feud was over and done with. After all, anything that meant less screen time being devoted to the Bella Twins fighting one another had to be a good thing. But not all family beefs lead to fans wishing they could pierce their eyes out with hot pokers. No, some end up being amongst the best things on TV, as was the case when Dominik Mysterio turned on his father Rey in the summer of 2022. Why was this one so great? Well, because it gave us Dirty Dom, one of the most effective heels in the industry today. Seriously, if we're going by sheer volume of boos given out by audiences around the world, the only person who's anywhere near him at this point is AEW's Don Callis. And for Dom, it all started at that September's Clash at the Castle, as it was there, while standing in the corner of both his father and Edge for their bout against Finn Balor and Damian Priest, he decided he'd finally had enough of being hand-waved away by fans, with this being what led to him turning on the babyfaces once things were over, and from there, joined forces with the Judgment Day. Obviously then, this left Rey deeply hurt, as in his mind, he'd done everything he could to make his son a star by teaming up with him over the months prior. But if that was the way Dominik wanted to play things, then that was what he'd let him do. Rey would just have no further part of it, was all. That's right, despite his son's repeated attempts to goad him during the months which followed, the former WWE champion refused to fight him in the ring, with him believing this was a line he simply couldn't cross. That was until WrestleMania 39 rolled around, of course, as there, finally, he agreed to teach Dom a lesson as the two went at it one-on-one, with Rey ultimately coming out the victor. But even if Rey was the winner here, the real beneficiary was the younger Mysterio, as since then, he's only gotten more over. Hell, you could argue that outside of his mommy Rhea Ripley, he's the most over character on Raw today. And that's a pretty big deal considering that this is a show whose roster also includes the likes of Cody Rhodes and main event Jey Uso. Will Dirty Dom ever get a chance to avenge his loss to his father by fighting him in a rematch? We've no doubt such a showdown will come at some point in the future, and that when it does, it'll draw massive numbers as fans are already primed for it. And this isn't the only rematch they're looking forward to between two family members in current-day WWE, as elsewhere on the show, there remains unfinished business between Roman Reigns and Jey Uso. Sure, this one has been complicated somewhat in recent weeks by the fact both Roman and Jey are now on separate brands, but then when has the WWE brand split ever stopped anyone from going anywhere they want, especially as the latter is now an undisputed tag team champion with Cody Rhodes? So who knows, maybe we'll be getting the rematch between the pair of cousins earlier than we think. But even if we do have to wait a while, there's a whole host of great material to go back and watch again in the meantime, as they've been involved in a program together since the summer of 2020 at this point. Yes, that was the time period when, following Roman's heel turn, Jey decided to stand up to his kin and try talking some sense into him by taking him on in two separate pay-per-view bouts, one of which was inside Hell in a Cell. Unfortunately though, the head of the table won each of these, and as a result, his cousin was forced to bend the knee and acknowledge him as the leader of the Bloodline going forward. Not that this would be the end of the problems between the two forever though, because fast forwarding a few years to 2023, dissension began to arise within the ranks of the Bloodline when Jey and his brother Jimmy decided to break free of Roman's grasp. And this led to a tag team bout at that July's Money in the Bank pay-per-view, where Jey became the first man to pin the Tribal Chief since 2019. So of course, it should go without saying that this earned main event Jey Uso a shot at his cousin's undisputed WWE Universal Championship the following month at SummerSlam. And it was in that bout he came painfully close to pinning the champ again, and in the process, ending his 1,000-plus day-long reign with the belts. Alas though, due to some interference, once it was over, Roman would be the one standing tall. And that's the way things remain to this day as he continues to be the king of the SmackDown brand, all while Jey has since outright quit the Bloodline and moved over to Raw instead. Sure, this is far from the end of the story, and the next chapter will no doubt come right in time for WrestleMania season. But in the meantime, the San Francisco native has plenty to occupy himself with, as like we mentioned a moment ago, he currently holds tag team gold with Cody Rhodes. And as it happens, Cody is also no stranger to being involved in family feuds, as back in 2015, he was taking part in one of his own with his brother Dustin. That's right, it's time to talk about one of the most infamous programs in modern WWE history, the one so bad it partially led to Cody outright leaving WWE and going on to become a founding father of All Elite Wrestling a few years later. Basically, it all started when, after his siblings had found quite a lot of success as a tag team act in late 2013, the company decided to add some extra sizzle to the whole affair by having the younger brother transform into a Goldust Light style figure named Stardust. The only problem with this, though, was that their pairing was working fine already, and adding Stardust to the mix only served to weaken things. Still, at least it would lead to a big WrestleMania match between the two when they eventually split, right? Well, no, because while both Cody and Dustin's original hope had been that they'd get to blow things off at the showcase of the Immortals once the former finally turned on the ladder in February of 2015, in the end, Vince McMahon felt otherwise. As far as he saw it, there was just no audience appetite to see the Rhodes brothers go one-on-one on the biggest stage, and as a result of that, it would instead take place the month prior at the B-show, Fastlane. Needless to say then, Cody felt incredibly slighted by this as he'd worked hard to get the feud over. So realizing he was hitting a brick wall continuing to work in New York, he decided to bet on himself by going it alone on the Indies. And you all know what happened next. AEW was formed in 2019, and at their inaugural show, Double or Nothing, the Rhodes brothers finally got to have their match the way they wanted to do it, with this one turning out to be an absolute blood-soaked classic. Of course, with Cody having since returned to WWE again, it's unclear if we'll ever get to see this one ran back. One thing we can be sure of, though, is that if it happens in WWE, it'll always play second fiddle to the real family drama going on there, and that's the one between the McMahons. Yes, wrestling in WWE has always been the story of Vince McMahon and his family, and that's exactly why they've been such prominent on-screen figures over the years, despite none of them being full-time in-ring performers. It doesn't matter if it's their runs during the Attitude Era where Shane, Stephanie, and Linda all served as both allies and foils to the boss at various points, or their subsequent returns over the years following that. It's always been McMahon first, and every other family second. Hell, they've even taken over WrestleMania main events at times, such as when the Mania 16 closer became all about WWE's first family when a McMahon was placed in every corner. And when they weren't standing in the corners of others, they were hitting the ring themselves, which is exactly what gave us the singles bouts between not only Vince and Shane, but Vince and Stephanie too. Even when the Invasion angle sought to give fans the once-in-a-lifetime battle between WWF and WCW, it all ended up becoming another McMahon family drama before it was all said and done. But of course that's not been the biggest source of drama between Vince, Shane, Stephanie, and Linda over the years. No, the real excitement is often played out behind the scenes. Perhaps most notably during 2022 when, in a Succession-like tale, Vince was ousted from the company and Stephanie was installed in his place as temporary CEO of WWE. And when Vince forced his way back into power a few months later, it led to Stephanie outright quitting in an apparent protest. But this wasn't the first time a McMahon child had quit in protest of what was going on behind the camera, as over a decade prior to that in 2010, Shane had also walked out on the company when he became disillusioned with the growing power his sister and her husband Triple H were wrestling away from him. Of course, with Vince technically being the only member of the family now working for WWE, it, in theory, means the McMahon family drama is over. That said, we wouldn't be surprised to see Stephanie, Shane, or even Linda return at some point and kick the whole thing off again, whether that be on-screen or off-screen. And if this does happen, it'll no doubt be similar to the real-life drama which played out over in TNA during 2011, as it was then that reality bled into fiction during the feud between Kurt Angle, Jeff Jarrett, and Karen Jarrett. But wait, what happened here? Well, prior to being Karen Jarrett, the new beau of The Last Outlaw had gone by the name of Karen Angle. That's right, following a real-life divorce from Kurt, Karen had gone on to find love all over again with one of her now ex-husband's co-workers. Needless to say then, this created a lot of drama behind the scenes, as with all three still working for TNA at the time, it led to some awkward moments. And that awkwardness would soon spread to the ring too, because going by the old Jerry Jarrett mantra of personal issues draw money, Dixie Carter decided to turn the whole thing into a storyline in January of that year, when right as Kurt and Jeff were in the middle of a feud, Karen made her presence felt by confronting the former and screwing him out of a number of big wins against her new husband. Was this difficult to watch at times given what we all knew about the personal lives of those involved? Sure. but it was also so engrossing it briefly made the Impact Zone feel interesting again during a time when it needed the boost the most. And it only got equal parts more awkward and engrossing when, on the March 3rd episode of Impact, Jeff and Karen decided to renew their wedding vows on live TV, with this all leading to the Olympic hero doing a run-in and destroying the set with an axe of all things. Still, this wouldn't be enough to bring Kurt complete satisfaction. No, in order to do that, he'd have to beat his foes in an actual match. And that's what led to him calling in some help from China, as on May 15th Sacrifice pay-per-view, they teamed up to defeat the Jarretts, and in the process, send Karen packing from TV for the next few months. And so just like that, the saga of Kurt, Jeff, and Karen ended, a love triangle which will no doubt go down in the history books of TNA forevermore. One love story which won't be as fondly remembered, however, is that which happened in WWE during late 2020 and early 2021, as it was there Rick and Charlotte Flair got into a beef which was memorable for all the wrong reasons, when the Nature Boy decided to start an on-screen relationship with her rival, Lacey Evans. Yes, why WWE chose to run this angle here is puzzling, as it didn't make anyone look good in the end, not Rick, not his apparent lover, and challenger for the Raw Women's title, Lacey Evans, and certainly not the, at the time, Raw Women's champ herself, Charlotte Flair. Hell, while Charlotte versus Lacey was never likely to be a game changer, it would have probably been better if it was just the two of them telling the tale of the hungry challenger wanting to take down the top dog of the division. But this wasn't the way things went, and so the champion's dad would be brought in to turn on her for no apparent reason, and then begin shacking up with the former Marine who was opposing her. Really, the only good thing we can say about this is that it got dropped before it went much further on account of Lacey Evans becoming pregnant for real in February 2021. And while we wouldn't be surprised if Vince didn't initially want to turn the whole thing into another angle, with Rick being the father of the sassy Southern Belle's child, thankfully that never happened, and instead all three just went their own separate ways, with Charlotte continuing on as champ, Lacey taking some time out to have her baby, and Rick choosing to wrestle one more match at 73 years old. One family feud that turned out as planned, though, came almost 20 years prior. And that's the great angle which took place when Eddie and Chavo Guerrero came to blows after a lengthy tag team run together. But why did they come to blows? Well, like with so many other wrestling feuds, this one started when one side grew jealous of the other's success. Yes, even if Los Guerreros had managed to win tag team gold together by this point, it just wasn't enough for Chavo, as when his uncle began having aspirations of going after the world title as a singles competitor as well, he decided he was suddenly feeling left out. So in order to try and get his uncle's attention then, he'd attack him when the two lost the WWE Tag Team titles to the Basham Brothers on the September 18th episode of SmackDown that year, turning heel in the process of doing so. And this quickly led to Eddie looking for revenge then, revenge he'd have trouble getting as it turned out, because by now, Chavo had added a new element to his act in the form of Chavo Classic, the father of the youngster and the brother of Eddie himself, someone who immediately made it clear that he was there to help his son get the win, no matter what. But even if Chavo had his dad in his corner, it didn't make much difference once the time came for his showdown with his Uncle Eddie at the January 25th, 2004 Royal Rumble. No, there, after a battle which waged on for just over 8 minutes, Latino Heat managed to come out the victor, and in the process, end the feud once and for all. Then just 1 month later, he'd go on to become WWE Champion when he defeated Brock Lesnar at February's No Way Out pay-per-view.